All right, let's dive into something a lot of you have been asking about. The U.S. nuclear testing program at Bikini Atoll.
Oh, yeah, this will be interesting.
We've got a Wikipedia article and a historical journal article to work from. And, well, just to give you an idea of what we're dealing with here, over 12 years, the U.S. detonated the equivalent of 1.6 Hiroshima-sized bombs every single day at Bikini and Inuyataq atolls.
Wow, that's just an incredible amount of destructive force. Hard to even fathom the impact of that.
Yeah, and to understand the scale of what happened, we have to start with the people who actually lived on Bikini Atoll before the testing even began.
Right, the Bikini Islanders. There were only about 167 of them. They lived a peaceful, pretty self-sufficient life on that tiny atoll.
And the U.S. government, they came to them about relocating, right?
Yeah, in 1946, a U.S. Navy Commodore visited the island and asked them to move, just temporarily, they said, so the U.S. could start testing atomic bombs. They promised them they could come back after the testing was over.
That's a pretty big ask. Did the islanders, did they resist at all?
Well, there were definitely concerns, obviously. But in the end, they did agree to it. And there's actually a quote from Bikini Chief Judah where he says, "We will go believing that everything is in the hands of God."
So they placed a lot of trust in the U.S. government.
They really did.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, that trust ended up being betrayed. They were moved to Rongerik Atoll, which was much smaller.
Yep.
And according to their beliefs, it was inhabited by what they call the demon girls of Ujjayi, which were these malevolent spirits.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't just a physical relocation. That must have been a real spiritual upheaval as well.
Exactly. And then on top of that, the food and water supplies on Rongerik were just not enough. They were having real trouble just surviving.
That's awful. And it makes the scale of those first tests, Operation Crossroads, even more shocking.
Right. Operation Crossroads was two tests, Able and Baker. The U.S. gathered 242 ships, including old battleships and aircraft carriers, in Bikini Atoll's lagoon as a target fleet.
So they were basically using these ships to see what a nuclear blast would do.
Yeah, pretty much. They wanted to study the effects on naval vessels and just gather data on the destructive power of these new weapons.
And what happened in those first two tests?
Well, Able was detonated above the target fleet, and it sank 5 ships. Baker, though, that one was detonated underwater.
Underwater.
It only sank 8 ships, but it created this massive radioactive cloud and ended up contaminating the whole fleet. Much worse than they thought it would be. The contamination was so bad they had to cancel the 3rd test they had planned, Charlie.
So what happened to the ships?
It basically became a floating radioactive graveyard.
Wow. Okay. And then in 1954, they did another series of tests, Operation Castle, and that included the infamous Castle Bravo detonation. That's when things got really bad, right?
Yeah, Castle Bravo was this new kind of bomb, a thermonuclear bomb with a dry fuel design. They thought it would have a yield of 4 to 8 megatons.
Which is already huge.
Yeah, but the actual yield was 15 megatons.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 1,000 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. The fallout from that spread incredibly far, all the way to Australia and Japan.
So this was a global event, not just something happening in a remote part of the Pacific. What about the Marshallese people? What happened to them during the Castle Bravo test?
It was really bad. The people on Rongelap Atoll, about 100 miles east of Bikini, they were showered with what they described as ashy snowflakes. It was radioactive fallout, of course.
It must have been terrifying seeing this strange thing happening, not knowing what it was.
Absolutely. And they weren't evacuated for days, so they got really sick with radiation poisoning. And you know what makes it even worse? The U.S. government used the islanders as test subjects for this secret medical study they called Project 4.1.
Wait, so they were experimenting on people who were already suffering from radiation?
Yeah, they were injecting them with radioisotopes and even doing unnecessary surgeries.
Okay.
Really disturbing. And the long-term effects have been devastating for them. They still have high rates of thyroid cancer, birth defects, miscarriages, all sorts of chronic diseases.
It's just heartbreaking. It's clear that the promise to let them return home was broken again and again. Where did they go after they were forced to evacuate a second time?
A lot of them ended up on Ebi, which is a small, really crowded island in the Kwajalein Atoll. And the conditions there, it's a stark contrast to the nearby U.S. military base on Kwajalein.
What do you mean?
The U.S. military base, it's on a 1.2 square mile island. They have a golf course, a yacht club, nice housing for about 1,300 Americans.
And the Marshallese people?
Ebi is packed with over 10,000 Marshallese people. The island's only a tenth of a square mile. It's been called the slum of the Pacific.
That's just Unbelievable.
It really shows the inequality, even decades after the testing program ended.
Mhm.
The islanders are pretty dependent on the U.S. for economic support and food aid, which, ironically, has led to new problems like obesity and diabetes.
So it's this whole web of interconnected issues that came from this testing program. Did the Marshallese just accept all of this? Or did they fight back?
Oh, they absolutely fought back. They started tons of legal battles and international advocacy efforts to make the U.S. take responsibility for the damage. One of the most vocal people fighting for them was Tony DeBrum, the former foreign minister of the Marshall Islands.
He actually witnessed the Bravo test, didn't he?
He did. And he became this really powerful voice, not just for the Marshall Islands, but for the whole world. He wanted to warn everyone about the lasting effects of nuclear weapons.
What did he have to say?
He tied the testing program to climate change. He was saying these tests weren't just about immediate damage. It was about the long-term damage to the planet as a whole.
So he was thinking about the big picture, the really long-term ramifications of these tests. But let's go back to those ghost ships for a minute. We talked about the scale of Operation Crossroads, but what was the point? What were they hoping to learn from all that?
Officially, they said they wanted to study how nuclear weapons affected naval vessels. Like, how would ships hold up against a blast? What did that mean for naval warfare in the atomic age?
So it was about military strategy as the world was entering this new nuclear era.
Yeah, that was the main idea. But some people argue that there were other reasons, too. The U.S. had just won World War II. They were a global superpower, and maybe these tests were partly a way to show off that power.
Sort of like a show of force for the rest of the world, especially with the Cold War starting.
Exactly. They wanted to demonstrate their capabilities, especially to the Soviets.
So you had this mix of Cold War politics and genuine scientific curiosity. What about the environmental impact, the long-term effects? Was anyone thinking about that back then?
That's interesting. You know, the term climate change wasn't really used in the 40s and 50s. But there were some scientists who were starting to understand that what we do can impact the environment.
So there were early warnings that maybe we were messing with things we didn't fully understand.
Yeah, you could say that. But it took a long time for people to really see how much damage nuclear testing did to the environment. We're still dealing with the effects today.
And what about the Marshallese people and their fight for justice? Did their legal battles actually get them any compensation?
Well, it was a really long and difficult fight, but they did get some compensation in the end. The U.S. government didn't set up a nuclear claims tribunal until 1986, after the Marshall Islands became independent.
So finally, they had a way to officially voice their grievances and seek justice.
Right. And the tribunal awarded them millions of dollars in compensation, though obviously no amount of money can truly make up for what they went through.
It's more about acknowledging the harm that was done, taking responsibility.
Exactly. And that's why people like Tony DeBrum were so important. He kept this issue in the public eye. He wasn't just demanding money. He was demanding a commitment to a world without nuclear weapons.
He took his own personal tragedy and turned it into a global call for action. But let's talk about the science for a minute. What did we learn from the Bikini Atoll tests? Were there any unexpected discoveries that came out of this terrible event?
Oh, absolutely. It's kind of another layer to this story. The tests were destructive, no question. But they also gave us a huge amount of scientific data that we're still using today to understand things like nuclear physics, radiation, even marine biology.
It's like there was a scientific silver lining, but it came at a horrible cost.
Right. The data helped scientists improve their models of nuclear explosions, leading to more accurate predictions of things like yield and fallout patterns.
That seems like pretty important information, especially when you think about what could happen in a nuclear war.
Absolutely. And if you remember those thriving coral reefs we talked about, they've actually become a living lab for scientists studying radiation's effects on marine ecosystems.
So by studying these organisms, we might learn how life adapts to extreme environments.
Exactly. And that could have applications beyond just radiation. It could be relevant to medicine, biotechnology, who knows?
So even in this dark chapter, there's the potential for discovery and innovation. But we can't forget the price that was paid for that knowledge, the suffering of the Marshallese people.
You're absolutely right. Their sacrifice is a reminder that we have to think about the ethics of scientific research. Science is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad.
It's a balancing act, right? Weighing the benefits of progress against the risks, making sure that people's well-being is always the priority.
Exactly. The story of Bikini Atoll reminds us
Hmm.
that scientific progress should never come at the expense of human dignity or the health of the planet.
So where does that leave us? We've talked about the history of nuclear testing at Bikini Atoll, the impact on the people, the broken promises, the fight for justice, and even some of the unexpected scientific discoveries that came out of it. Is there a bigger lesson here, something that goes beyond what happened on those islands?
I think the story of Bikini Atoll shows us something fundamental about humanity, our ability to create and destroy. We can unlock the secrets of the universe and harness incredible power, but we can also cause immense suffering to ourselves and our world.
It highlights our dual nature, I guess you could say, our capacity for good and bad. What can we learn from that?
The challenge for us, for all of us, is to make sure our choices lead to creation, not destruction. To use our knowledge and power responsibly so that future generations inherit a world that's peaceful and sustainable.
That's a big challenge, but it's one we have to try to meet. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it and try to build a better future. What's something our listeners should think about as they reflect on this story?
Yeah, it really makes you think about the choices we make, doesn't it? As individuals, as nations, the whole world.
Huh.
All those choices have consequences that just ripple outwards, shaping the present and the future.
Like that butterfly effect thing.
Exactly. Every decision starts this chain of events impacting people everywhere, sometimes for generations. So as you're thinking about this deep dive, maybe think about the choices you make in your own life, the values behind those choices and how they affect the world.
Even small choices, personal choices, can be part of a bigger change, for good or bad.
Absolutely. We can't change what's already happened, but we can definitely try to create a future where we don't repeat those mistakes. A future where peace, justice, and respect for the planet guide us.
It's a powerful message. I think it really highlights what we've been talking about today. This testing program at Bikini Atoll, it caused environmental damage, human suffering, and broken promises. The Marshallese are still dealing with the consequences, but they're also incredibly resilient in their fight for justice and nuclear disarmament. And in the middle of all this tragedy, there's this unexpected sign of hope. How resilient nature itself has been in Bikini Atoll's lagoon.
That resilience, it shows us that even after immense destruction, life can adapt and even thrive. It's a real testament to the power of nature, maybe even some inspiration as we face the challenges of our own time.
It reminds us that we have to learn from the past, make good choices now, and work towards a future where humanity and the planet are taken care of. The Bikini Atoll story, it's not just history, it's a call to action. It's telling us to be more careful with our planet and fight for a just and peaceful world.